Well, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away, they say. So, welcome back to our virtual Bible study. I am Kurt Messick. I am the chaplain here at Beltrace for you. And we had exactly one Bible study where we could get together and meet until everything got shut down again. But that's in the best interests of our community. That's in the best interests of all of you there. And guess what? This is the first video where I'm not going to say, I want to come and visit you, because right now, for the next few weeks, we're on complete lockdown. So apart from the hula cart, I think you're not going to have a lot of visitors. But we're going to do the best we can, and I'm going to continue to do these online Bible studies for you. I will also do, for the next few weeks, an online chapel service for you. I know you won't be able to gather as a group together to watch these things, but it's my hope that you'll be able to see these things, maybe not even on Saturday morning or Saturday afternoon. You can actually watch it whenever you want to, and get some benefit from it that way. So I will have this available for you by Saturday. And each of the subsequent Bible studies that I put together, I will also have up there for you on Saturday as well. I'm going to keep this at about maybe 35, 40 minutes or so in length, so that it doesn't go too long, because I think that's about as long as most people will sort of sit and watch things on their phone or their computer. So I'm going to aim for that length of time. But one of the things that we will do is we'll continue on where we were. We did, in the face-to-face Bible study, talk about the sacrifice of Isaac. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. So I'm going to go through the text again with that, for those of you who have been doing things virtually with me and were not able to be at the Bible study last Saturday. So one of the things we'll do is I'll read through some of the commentary and read through some of the verses here, and then we'll sort of go on to the next thing. So in a sense, it will be as if nothing had actually interrupted our virtuality here. And we'll just see how it works, and we'll go on. But again, if you would like for me to call you, I can't visit you for the next week or two, but I can talk to you on the phone. I have my own phone sort of right over here. So and it's pretty smart, but it doesn't know. See, it wants to disappear here actually. It's pretty smart, but it doesn't know your phone number and doesn't know whether or not you want me to call you. So here's the deal. Let Melissa know if you want me to give you a call, and we'll arrange for that, and I'll give you a call so we can chat, and we can communicate that way, and we can pray together. We can tell stories, whatever is needed, because I know it can feel a little bit isolating when you're sort of not interacting with people as you normally would. And we sort of got used to, it only took a couple of weeks for us to get used to a new normal, and now we're back sort of where it is. Chances are good we're going to have this happen a couple of times during the coming months, because this is the normal cold and flu season anyway. So it's not really a surprise that the virus has reared up again. So we'll do the best we can, and we'll go forward from there. But as I have been working through with us, I'm using Everett Fox's The Five Books of Moses, new translation from the Shotgun series that's there. And I will sort of put my little book clip here along the way. But one of the things we see in this is Abraham is talking to God, and God is talking to Abraham directly at the beginning of the story, but we then have a messenger who seems to come in near the end. So you might notice that as well. You might also notice that, unlike some of the other stories where Abraham is sort of negotiated with God back and forth, there isn't a negotiation here. God tells Abraham to do something, and he goes and does it, even though it's perhaps the most shocking thing that he could possibly be asked to do. We're in chapter 22 of Genesis, and it says, Now, after these events, we had other things that were happening before, remember? God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he replied, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Yitzhak, Isaac. Remember, we're using the more Hebraic terminology or Hebraic pronunciation in the Shocking book here. And go forth to the land of Moriah and offer him up there as an offering upon one of the mountains that I will tell you of. And Abraham started early in the morning. He saddled his donkey. He took 2 of his servants with him and Yitzhak his son. He split wood for the offering up and arose and went to the place that God had told him of. One of the things to notice here is God tells Abraham to do something and he does it. He doesn't barter, he doesn't negotiate, he doesn't try to work around, oh, is this really what you want to do? He doesn't question it. And that's actually unusual for Abraham. So there's something already going on in this story here. It says, on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Abraham said to his servants, You stay here with the donkey, and I and the lad will go yonder. And we will bow down and then return to you. And Abraham took the wood for the offering up, and he placed them upon Yitzhak his son. And his hand took the fire and the knife. Thus the 2 of them went together. So here we have just the 2 of them going off. The servants aren't part of this ritual. They're not part of this happening that's about to happen. And in the Christian tradition, there's often a parallel drawn between Jesus carrying his own cross and Yitzhak, Isaac, carrying the wood here. Of course, in the Jewish tradition, that parallel would not apply. But in the Christian tradition, that they sort of see a foreshadowing here. Yitzhak said to Abraham his father, he said, Father, and he replied, Here I am, my son. He said, Here are the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the offering? And Abraham said, God will see for himself to the lamb for the offering up, my son. Thus the 2 of them went together. They came to the place that God had told him of. There Abraham built an altar. And actually, the translation here uses the word slaughter site, because at this point, an altar would actually be, you would have animal sacrifices, or in some conditions, in some parts of the world, we had human sacrifice, but it was an actual sacrifice site, so or a slaughter site. That word in the Hebrew tradition, or that phrase in the Hebrew, means that literally. He arranged the wood and bound Yitzhak his son and placed him on the altar atop of the wood. Abraham stretched out his hand. He took the knife to slay his son. But Yahweh's messenger called to him from heaven and said, notice it's not God directly the way it seemed to be at the beginning of the story. We're told explicitly it's a messenger here. What's the significance of that? I've always wondered if there's a significance in that God tells him one thing and a messenger tells him something else. Abraham, Abraham, he said. Here I am, he replied. Do not stretch your hand out against the lad. Do not do anything to him, for now I know that you are in awe of God. You have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And again, Christians draw a parallel of offering the only son. Now, here's an interesting thing. For Abraham, this is not his only son. We had Ishmael. We had the story of Ishmael before we had the story of Yitzhak, of Isaac. So we know there's another son out there. For Sarah, this will become an important point here. It is her only son, according to the text that we know of. It's not Abraham's, but it's the only one that's supposed to be part of the continuation of this particular blessing of being chosen. Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw there a ram caught behind the thicket by its horns. Abraham went and he took the ram and he offered it up as an offering in place of his son. Abraham called the name of that place Yahweh sees, or God sees. Moriah is seeing. As the saying is today, on God's mountain it is seen. Now God's messenger, Yahweh's messenger, called to Abraham a second time from heaven, and again it's the messenger, and said, by myself I swear, Yahweh's utterance, God's words, indeed, because you have done this thing, have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. Indeed, I will bless you, bless you. There's a doubling of the blessing there. I will make your seed many, yes, many, like the stars of the heavens, and like the sand that is on the shore of the sea. Your seed shall inherit the gates of their enemies. All the nations of the earth shall enjoy blessing through your seed, in consequence of your hearkening to my voice. And Abraham returned to his servants. They rose and went together to Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. So this is a fascinating tale. Over and over and over again, this has been depicted in art, has been depicted in literature, has been discussed in philosophy and in various ways of trying to understand the text. One of the portions of the commentary here says, chapter 22 is a tale of God's seeming retraction of his promise to Abraham. The fact that other issues may be involved here may be quite beside the point. Coming just one chapter after the birth of the long-awaited son, the story completely turns around the tension of the whole cycle and creates a new, frightening tension of its own. The real horror of the story lies in the threatened contradiction of what has gone before. So you sort of think about it, why would God do this? After all the waiting, all the promises, everything that was there, why would this happen again? Now, there are some scholars who point out the fact that, as I mentioned before, there are cultures that practice human sacrifice. There are some that practice child sacrifice. And one of the things that you get from this story is God doesn't want that. God doesn't want you to sacrifice your child. God stops it. Does the whole acting out of the drama end up as a sacrifice? The answer is yes and no. In the literal sense, we always call this the sacrifice of Isaac, and yet he wasn't sacrificed. But there seems to be something else happening here. Again, the commentary from Everett Fox says, most noticeable in the narrative is Abraham's silence, his mute acceptance and acting on God's command. We are told of no sleepless nights, nor does he ever say a word to God. Instead, he is described with a series of verbs: hurrying, saddling, taking, splitting, arising, going. So Abraham the bargainer, so willing to enter into negotiations with relations, local princes, here falls completely silent. So that is an interesting kind of thing. Did Abraham know that God would stop him? That's actually been in some commentaries that I've read before, that Abraham knew that this was an acting out rather than an actual thing. I don't like that interpretation. I don't like that idea, because it takes away all of the tension. It takes away, for me, all of the meaning. If they're just sort of play acting at this, then the story doesn't really have a lot of meaning to it. But one of the things we see again is that this becomes a renewal of God's promise, a renewal of that covenant and blessing. And the final portion I'll read from this portion of the commentary says, in many ways, this story is the midpoint of Genesis, and we are roughly halfway through the book. It brings the central theme of continuity and discontinuity to a head in the strongest possible way. After Moriah, we can breathe more easily, knowing that God will come to the rescue of his chosen ones in the direst of circumstances. At the same time, we are left to ponder the difficulties of being a chosen one, subject to such an incredible test. So I remember the sort of movie biography of Golda Meir, who was a prime minister in Israel and one of the leaders of the Israeli sort of independence and formation as a nation. Part of the main groups of people who did that, and the role was being played by Ingrid Bergman as one of her final roles. Did a really good job. But there were conflicts, and they depict the different wars that have taken place in Israeli independence and formation, and then various other conflicts they had with Jordan and with Egypt and with Syria and other things, and it's sort of like they're getting beaten down again and again and again. And one of the lines, sorry for the long-winded preamble here, but one of the lines I remember best from that movie is Golda Meir looking out the window at various things that are happening, and one of her aides saying, "Well, we've always been a people who have suffered and have endured." And she said, "Yes, wouldn't it be great if God could choose someone else once in a while?" So yeah, the problems of being the chosen ones, the problems, and there are different ways of being chosen. I think I coined the word chosenality when I was in seminary. My seminary advisor sort of laughed at me when I did that, but and anyone who remembers certain kinds of advertising back in the 60s and 70s, I think it was, there was this Wesson cooking oil, and it said it had Wessonality, of putting personality into your food with the cooking oil, Wessonality. So I think he was remembering that when I used the word chosenality. I don't think that's a proper term, but it felt right at the time. I chose to use it. Different people are chosen for different things. Different peoples are chosen for different things. And as we remember reading in Genesis, when Hagar and Ishmael are being driven off, are being removed from the encampment, largely because Sarah's like, I'm not going to have this woman's son inherit with mine. God assures them that there's a blessing for them too, and that there will be nations from them as well. And even though there's a conflict that's being sort of set up there that endures in some ways to this day, we also see at the same time there is God's blessing on both. Now, the next portion after the sacrifice of Isaac story, and I know I'm not giving it nearly as much commentary here on our video as it warrants, but we did talk about it in our face-to-face group, so I don't want to belabor the subject too much. But we have a little brief portion after that where Abraham is told that we have other relatives who are being born and other relatives who come into the picture. In part, this sets up later aspects of the story, and in part, it fleshes out a genealogy. So this becomes part of what Genesis does. It gives us beginning points of a lot of different portions. But at chapter 23, we see what the first thing we see back home after this sacrifice of Isaac is this. Now Sarah's life was 100 years and 20 years and 7 years, thus the years of Sarah's life. And Sarah died in Arba town, that is now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Abraham set about to lament for Sarah and to weep over her. Then Abraham arose from his presence of the dead and spoke to the sons of Het, saying, I am a sojourner settled among you. Give me title to a burial holding among you, so that I may bury my dead from my presence. The sons of Het answered Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my Lord. You are one exalted by God in our fold. In the choicest of our burial sites you may bury your dead. No man among us will deny you his burial site for burying your dead. So once again, Abraham is looked on as a significant local chieftain or prince even. Abraham arose, he bowed low to the people of the land, to the sons of Het, and he spoke to them, saying, If it be then according to your wish that I bury my dead from my presence, hear me and interpose for me to Ephron, son of Zohar, that he may give me title to the cave of Machpelah, that is his, that is at the edge of his field. For the full silver worth, let him give me title in your midst for a burial holding. Now Ephron had a seat amidst the sons of Het, and Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham in the ears of the sons of Het, of all who had entry into the council gate of the city, saying, Not so, my lord, hear me. The field I give to you, and the cave that is therein I give it to you as well. Before the eyes of the sons of my people I give it to you. Bury your dead. This is part of the way contracts were done back then, is you gather a lot of witnesses, and the entrance to a city, the entry gate, is sort of like where a lot of business gets done, because pretty much everyone passes there at some point. So this is a standard way in which people would do business back then. We see that Ephraim is a Hittite. Sons of Het is also the Hittites, the Hittite people there. And one of the things we're seeing is that they want to be generous to Abraham. So they take it, it's yours. Abraham bowed before the people of the land, verse 12, and spoke to Ephraim in the ears of the people of the land, saying, But if you yourself would only hear me out, I will give you silver payment for the field. Accept it from me, so that I may bury my dead there. And Ephraim answered Abraham, saying to him, My lord, hear me. A piece of land worth 400 silver weight. What is that between you and me? You may bury your dead. So in other words, Abraham doesn't want charity. He wants, and he wants, no mistake, that the title is his. Abraham hearkened to Ephron. Abraham weighed out to Ephraim the silver worth, of which he had spoken in the ears of the sons of Het, 400 silver weight at the going merchant's rate. Thus was established the field of Ephron that is in Machpelah, that faces Mamre, the field as well as the cave that is in it, and the trees that were in all the field that were in the territory round about, for Abraham as an acquisition, before the eyes of the sons of Het, of all who had entry into the council gate of the city. So this is actually a very long passage given what's happening here. We've had many more significant things that had much less in terms of verses and phrasing. So we have a whole negotiation and contract written out here. Afterwards, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, that is now in Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And there's still a city called Hebron to this day. Thus was established the field as well as the cave that is in it for Abraham as a burial holding from the sons of Het. See, there's repetition there, notice. We've talked about this before. When you have repetition in that way, this was originally an oral story, just as these contracts were oral contracts. Most people did not get pen and paper out. They didn't have pen and paper back then. Most of the time, you might at best have a cuneiform slab, and you could mark the different aspects of the contracts. But for the most part, that was not done, at least in so far as what we can tell. Most transactions like this would not be done in that way. So we have this territory. Now I'm going to drop a picture in here of what is considered today by many to be the burial site of Abraham. And this is called the Cave of the Patriarchs, although you'll notice it looks like a sort of a big kind of castle structure here, known to Jewish people as the Cave of Machpelah, and to Muslims as the Sanctuary of Abraham, because this is the forerunner of both of these groups, through Isaac and through Ishmael. And it's in the old city of Hebron. We've mentioned that here a couple of times. And the large rectangular thing that you're seeing on the screen now dates from the Herodian era. And then we had it sort of modified a couple of different times, including the Byzantines, by the Byzantines who are Christians, as well as the Muslims who also had it as have a mosque there near there as well. The situation at the place is still one that's tense because, again, as many places in Israel and the West Bank are today, it has significance both to Jewish and Muslim people. At least one commentary I've read says this is considered by many Jewish people to be the second holiest place in the world after the Temple Mount. Then there, of course, is going to be a holiness attached to it because of the significance of Abraham to Muslim people as well. So this is an interesting place to be. Can also be a dangerous place to be. This was the site of a terrorist action, I think in 1994. So yeah, it's a significant place. It's a significant thing, and to this day, we're recounting the story of who's buried in this, because the stories of Abraham, of Isaac, of Ishmael continue on as significant in our lifetime. But one of the things we sometimes forget, and I want to emphasize here, is that this is also the story of Sarah. And one of the things that often gets dropped, because we have all of this wording, all of this negotiation, all of this contractual stuff, is that as soon as Abraham gets back and she hears what happened, the very next thing we see in the Bible, she dies. Did she die of shock? Did she die of heartbreak? Was this shocking to her? We're told she was 127 years old. We don't know exactly how they counted years back then and ages. People end up being like magnificently old. Chances are they were counting some other way than we count today. Calendar studies is an interest of mine, and I can tell you there are lots of different ways of measuring years, lots of different ways of measuring calendars. One of the ideas I've heard is that they were counting seasons, which in this part of the world you basically have two. So instead of dying at 127, she died at 63 and a half, which would be much more reasonable as we think about what a human lifespan is. That would also be fabulously old in the ancient world, because a lot of people didn't make it to that age. So Sarah almost gets left out of the story here, because we're told she dies. We're told how old she is. We're told she dies. And then we have this long-winded stuff about the purchase and the gold or in the silver and the telling it in the city gate and all of this stuff. And then we're told, oh yes, and then he buried her here. So this isn't just the tomb of Abraham, this is the tomb of Abraham and Sarah. And in the Jewish tradition, you are Jewish because your mother is Jewish. So Sarah becomes a very significant person here. Isaac was her only son. Isaac was not, in fact, as I mentioned before, Abraham's only son. And Abraham will go on to have other children as well. But for Sarah, this was it. So one of the things to note is that Abraham and Sarah don't have a relationship after the sacrifice of Isaac. It's like she wasn't consulted, that we're told. I had one person sort of give me another interpretation. Well, maybe she didn't know about it at all. Yeah, but how likely is that? I mean, it's possible, but you can't really argue that it's okay. So she was never going to find out, because everyone knows. It got written in the text. It's here. Everyone knows this story. In fact, it's one of the stories that everyone knows if you know anything about the Bible at all. It tends to be one of the standout stories. So it doesn't seem credible to me that Sarah wouldn't know. Even if Sarah didn't know, Isaac knew. Isaac certainly knew. And one of the things we also notice in the text, Abraham and Isaac don't have much of a relationship after this either. And that becomes an issue as well. So I'm going to leave it there, and we will pick up at chapter 24 next time. Since we're on at least a 2-week hiatus from gathering activities at Beltrace, I will do another one of these for next weekend, and we will continue on with the remainder of Abraham and remainder of Abraham's life. And one of the things we will then see is we're sort of getting into the next of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you will hear sometimes blessings in the name of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But one of the things I noticed during my time with my church back in the 80s and 90s, they were beginning to say, instead of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they would start adding the women in there as well. The God of Abraham and Sarah, of Isaac and Rebekah, of Jacob and Rachel and Leah. Of course, then you have to have a discussion on why were there 2 names added to that last one. And that's worthy of discussion too, but we're jumping ahead if we have that discussion now. So we'll talk about it later. Thank you all. Remember, I can't come and visit you this week, but I'm up for phone calls, and I'm at home, you're at home. So if you remember the old AT&T, or it might even be the old Bell commercials, reach out and touch someone using the phone. That's socially distant and that's safe. We don't even have to wear a mask when we're on the phone. So I hope to chat with you soon. Bye-bye.